Central banks are institutions of the most deadly hostility existing against the principles and form of our Constitution. Thomas Jefferson wrote that in 1816. The irony? By then, the constitutional republic he helped build was already being financed by private banking houses Jefferson had spent his career warning against. Governments don't fund wars with speeches. They fund them with credit. And credit, in the early 19th century, had a very short list of suppliers. Here's the thing about power. The moment you can see it, it's already performing for you. Thrones are visible. Parliaments are visible. Battlefields are very, very visible. But liquidity? Settlement networks? The synchronized movement of gold across borders during a continental war? That's invisible. And in 1815, one family had built the cleanest pipeline for all three. I'm Malcolm, and this is History Meets Economics. If you're the kind of person who wants to understand how systems actually work, not just the stories we tell about them, then hit that subscribe button. Because what we're about to dig into isn't another conspiracy theory. It's something far more interesting. The architecture of empire. You already know the name. You've probably seen the charts, the conspiracy threads, the net worth estimates that don't even pretend to be accurate. You know the Rothschilds were powerful. You know they financed empires. You know Waterloo, or at least the legend of it. But here's what those stories skip. How? Not how they got rich. How the system they operated inside was designed to make someone like them inevitable. Because if you removed the Rothschilds from history, someone else would have filled the gap. The infrastructure was already built. They just learned to maintain it better than anyone else. Let's start with what no one wants to hear. 19th century geopolitics ran on boring, tedious, catastrophically fragile financial plumbing. Moving money across Europe in 1800 was not a matter of ledgers and spreadsheets. It was physical. Gold had to physically move, loaded onto wagons, guarded through mountain passes, ferried across rivers that doubled as borders, where promises had to be trusted enough that gold didn't need to move. Picture this. A Prussian general receives orders to move 30,000 troops east. Those troops need to eat. They need boots. They need ammunition. And all of that costs money. But the Prussian treasury is in Berlin, and the troops are marching through territories that change hands every 6 months. You can't send a wagon full of coins through enemy lines. You need someone in every city who can issue credit now, denominated in the local currency, and backed by someone their enemies would still honor even if the regime collapsed tomorrow. That's not a product. That's a system. And systems don't run on ambition. They run on coordination, redundancy, and the one thing rarer than gold, trust at scale. Here's the trade-off nobody tells you about. You can have a powerful centralized state that controls its own currency and capital flows, or you can have the ability to move money quickly across hostile borders during wars that rewrite the map every 5 years. You can't have both. Centralized states are slow because every decision requires 17 signatures and a committee meeting. Wartime states are desperate. They need liquidity yesterday, not next quarter. Desperation creates opportunity for anyone who can clear payments faster than the postal service. The Rothschilds didn't invent international banking. They didn't invent credit. They didn't even invent the idea of a family-run financial network. What they built, what mattered, was a settlement layer that could operate through war, not around it. Liquidity when everyone else had frozen. Neutrality when everyone else was picking sides. Speed when the entire continent was reorganizing itself by cannon fire. That was the game. And if you wanted to play it, you had to be trusted by people who hated each other. Frankfurt's Judengasse wasn't a neighborhood. It was a legal perimeter, 12 feet wide in places, narrow enough that two carts couldn't pass each other without one backing up. The street gates locked at sunset and on Christian holidays. No property ownership outside the walls. No entry into craft guilds. No holding public office. Marriage required permission from city authorities who limited how many Jewish families could exist at any given time. It was suffocation by municipal law. Meyer Amschel Rothschild grew up inside that perimeter in the mid-1700s, and if you want to understand what happened next, you have to sit with how that shapes a person. Not poetically, functionally. If you can't own land, you optimize for portability. If you can't join guilds, you specialize in what guilds don't control. If you're shut out of political power, you find the people who have political power and make yourself necessary to them in ways they can't replicate. Meyer Amschel's father dealt in currency exchange and trade goods, necessary work, but undistinguished. Meyer Amschel went further. He dealt in rare coins. Not just any coins, collector's items for aristocrats with inherited fortunes and a fetish for Roman emperors. Think about the genius of this. Coins weren't just metal. They were historical signifiers, conversation pieces, markers of taste and education. When you're selling a rare aureus to a count, you're not just making a transaction. You're having a conversation about Trajan's military campaigns. about numismatic scholarship, about the aesthetics of power. And Meyer Amschel, stuck in the Judengasse, started having those conversations with people who lived in palaces. One of them was Wilhelm IX, Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel, one of the wealthiest men in Europe. Wilhelm's fortune came from a business so grotesque it's almost elegant. He rented out Hessian soldiers as mercenaries to foreign governments. The British Empire paid Wilhelm handsomely to supply troops for the American Revolution, roughly 30,000 men over 8 years. It was violence as a revenue stream, and it generated so much cash that Wilhelm needed someone to manage it, move it, invest it, and keep it quiet. That someone, eventually, was Meyer Amschel Rothschild. Not because of genius. Not because of conspiracy. Because he was there, he was trusted, and he could do something Wilhelm's own government couldn't: move money across borders without triggering alarms. Here's where most stories turn the Rothschilds into financial superheroes. That's lazy. What made them dangerous wasn't talent, it was doctrine. A set of rules they applied so consistently it looked like magic. Rule 1. Diversify by geography, not by asset class. Meyer Amschel had 5 sons. He sent them to 5 cities: Frankfurt, London, Paris, Vienna, Naples. Not as branch managers, as nodes. Each son ran an independent house, but all 5 houses acted as a single liquidity network. If a government in London needed to pay troops in Vienna, the Rothschilds didn't ship gold across Europe, a journey that could take weeks and required armed escorts. The London house issued a credit note. The Vienna house honored it. Settlement happened later, internally, in whatever currency made sense. The client got speed. The Rothschilds got fees. The system got stability. This is how they financed the Duke of Wellington's Peninsula campaign, British gold flowing to Spanish guerrillas fighting Napoleon, all without a single shipment crossing enemy lines. Rule 2, neutrality is non-negotiable. The Rothschilds financed everyone: British subsidies to continental allies, French war reparations after Napoleon's defeat, Austrian reconstruction bonds, Prussian state debt. They didn't care who won. They cared that whoever won could still pay them back. Neutrality wasn't a moral stance, it was a survival guarantee. The moment you pick a side, you lose access to half the market. The moment you lose access, you lose redundancy. The moment you lose redundancy, you're just another rich family waiting to be expropriated. In 2019, Rothschild and Company advised on 336 merger and acquisition deals globally, ranking 3rd worldwide by sheer volume. Still playing both sides. Still agnostic about outcomes. Rule 3, liquidity over assets. Own nothing that can't be moved. Bonds, yes. Gold, yes. Real estate, rarely. Factories, almost never. The Rothschilds were not industrialists, they financed industrialists, which is a completely different game. Industrial assets are immobile. Governments can seize them, mobs can burn them, revolutions can redistribute them. But a bond denominated in pounds and held in London, that's portable. That survives regime change. Even today, the family's wealth is structured around financial services, private equity, and wine estates, high-value, relatively liquid assets. Cateau Lafite Rothschild isn't just a vineyard. It's one of the most traded brands on the global wine secondary market, with its own price index tracked daily by LivX. You can buy and sell it like stock. This is the trade-off no one talks about: visibility versus safety. If you own the largest steel mill in Europe, everyone knows you're powerful. You're also a target. If you own the debt that funded the mill, you're invisible. And in the long run, invisible wins. Yes, we're doing Waterloo. But not the myth. Here's what actually happened. Nathan Rothschild, running the London house, had built a private intelligence network across Europe. Carrier pigeons, paid informants, messengers on fast horses. Faster than the British government. Faster than the press. When Napoleon was defeated at Waterloo on June 18th, 1815, Nathan knew before the cabinet did. According to the most reliable accounts, a Rothschild agent named Rothworth reached London on the night of June 19th, a full day before Wellington's official dispatch arrived. And Nathan traded on it. Not by screaming in the streets, not by crashing the market in some theatrical con. He quietly bought British government bonds, consols that had been depressed by 2 decades of war uncertainty. When the official news arrived and bond prices spiked, he sold. He made a fortune. Estimates suggest upwards of £1 million, an almost incomprehensible sum at the time. Was it insider trading? By modern standards, obviously. By 1815 standards, it was just intelligence advantage. The problem wasn't legality. The problem was visibility. The story got out. It got exaggerated. Some versions claimed Nathan had pretended Napoleon won to trigger a panic, then bought bonds at rock bottom. That's fiction. But the narrative stuck. Within a generation, the Waterloo trade became the founding legend of Rothschild omnipotence. Here's the trap. Being right makes you famous. Being famous makes you a target. And once you're a target, neutrality stops protecting you. The Waterloo story was weaponized against them for the next 2 centuries. Every financial panic, every war, every market collapse, someone would blame the Rothschilds. Not because they caused it, because the narrative had already been written. Success has a heat signature. By the 1820s, the Rothschilds were financing post-Napoleonic reconstruction across Europe. French war reparations, over 700 million francs. Austrian state loans. British trade. They weren't just bankers, they were the settlement layer for great power diplomacy. And that made them structurally necessary, which meant governments resented them even while depending on them. Nationalist movements hated them because they were cosmopolitan. Monarchists hated them because they were nouveau riche, wealth without noble blood. Liberals hated them because they financed conservative regimes. Conservatives hated them because they wouldn't freeze out liberal governments. Anti-Semites hated them because they were Jewish and powerful, and that combination has always been gasoline. Here's the thing about operating as infrastructure: you become a target for every ideology. You're never on anyone's side in a way that satisfies them. You're a mercenary, a facilitator, a necessary evil. And the moment the system you're supporting starts to crack, you're the first one people turn on. The Rothschilds survived this for decades through portability, liquid assets, offshore holdings, legal structures that could shift jurisdictions faster than governments could legislate. When France restricted Jewish financial activity in the 1830s, they restructured through London. When Austria imposed limits, they routed through Frankfurt. The network bent. It didn't break. Let's talk about the Suez Canal. In 1875, Ismail Pasha, the Khedive of Egypt, was drowning in debt. He borrowed heavily to modernize Egypt, and now his creditors were circling. He needed cash immediately, and he had one liquid asset: his shares in the Suez Canal Company. The canal had opened 6 years earlier and was already one of the most strategically important waterways on Earth. It cut weeks off the route to India, Britain's imperial lifeline. The British government wanted those shares desperately, but Parliament wasn't in session. Treasury funds weren't immediately accessible. Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli needed £4 million now, not next month, so he turned to Lionel de Rothschild, who arranged the loan in under 24 hours. Not a bribe, not a conspiracy, a bridge loan. The Rothschilds didn't take ownership of the canal. They provided liquidity when the state couldn't move fast enough, collected their interest, and disappeared from the transaction. Here's the mechanism. Governments are slow because they're accountable. Committees, votes, procedures. Private networks are fast because they're not. That speed has value. But the appearance of that speed, one family making a decision that reshapes imperial strategy, looks like shadow government. This pattern repeated constantly. Post-Napoleonic French reconstruction loans, Brazilian state bonds in the 1820s, Ottoman debt restructuring. The Rothschilds didn't force these deals. They were asked. But here's the trade-off. Every time you're the only one who can solve a liquidity crisis, you become essential. And the moment you're essential, you're no longer just a service provider. You're a dependency. And dependencies, when politics shift, become liabilities. The 20th century was not kind to private financial networks. World War I shattered the international gold standard. National governments took direct control of capital flows. Central banks became dominant. The age of family-run financial empires was ending, not through competition, but through policy. Then came the seizures. The Rothschild Bank in Vienna, Creditanstalt, one of the most powerful institutions in Central Europe, was expropriated by the Nazis in 1938. The Paris House, nationalized by François Mitterrand's government in 1982. The Naples branch had already closed in the 1860s. Frankfurt became symbolic, not operational. This wasn't failure. This was the inevitable cost of visibility. The Rothschilds had survived for over a century by being faster, more liquid, and more neutral than anyone else. But speed doesn't matter when governments nationalize your assets. Liquidity doesn't matter when borders close. Neutrality doesn't matter when the political question is whether private networks should exist at all. The doctrine that built them couldn't protect them from structural realignment. When the system they operated inside was replaced, they had two choices: adapt or disappear. They adapted. Barely. The Rothschild name still exists. Rothschild and Company, the modern incarnation, is a mid-tier investment bank managing roughly 111 billion euros in assets. That's not small, but it's not systemically dominant either. For context, BlackRock manages over $10 trillion. JP Morgan Chase holds more than $3 trillion in assets. The Rothschilds aren't even in the same weight class anymore. Some family members still hold significant private wealth. Estimates range into the billions, concentrated in financial services, private equity, fine art, and those famous wine estates. In 2024, Rothschild and Company was hired to find investors for renewable energy projects in South Africa, 12 gigawatts of solar and wind in development. In 2017, when Greece was still navigating its debt crisis, Athens hired Rothschild as a sovereign debt advisor to help manage negotiations with European creditors. They're still active, still influential in certain circles, but no longer necessary. No government depends on them the way France depended on them in 1817. No empire builds infrastructure around their liquidity the way Britain did with Suez. The financial system moved on. It's bigger, faster, more impersonal, and far more powerful than any single family could ever be. The Rothschilds didn't lose. They were outscaled. Central banks, sovereign wealth funds, multinational corporations, these entities don't need a trusted intermediary. They are the intermediary. So what does this leave us with? Not a conspiracy, not a morality tale, a systems lesson. Power doesn't come from secrecy. It comes from position inside a system that others depend on. The Rothschilds weren't puppet masters. They were the settlement layer. And settlement layers, when designed well, become invisible. You don't notice them until they break. They didn't break, the world just built a different network. But here's the uncomfortable truth. That network still has a settlement layer. It still has invisible infrastructure. It still has entities that governments quietly depend on when things go wrong. They just don't have a single family name attached anymore. They're the International Monetary Fund, coordinating bailouts. They're sovereign wealth funds from Norway and Singapore, quietly stabilizing markets. They're central bank swap lines that move hundreds of billions across borders during crises. They're distributed, bureaucratic, harder to see. Which means the real question isn't, did the Rothschilds control the world? It's what systems control it now, and why don't we talk about them? If you made it this far, drop your favorite emoji in the comments. You've earned it. Also, where are you watching from? I'd love to know. I'm Malcolm, and this is History Meets Economics. If you think this documentary is wrong, explain where. If you think it's right, explain why. Here's another moment history met economics.